You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Guardian columnist, Zoe Williams, and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Wallis Simons. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Daily Telegraph leads with comments by the Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins, that she would back the decriminalisation of abortion. The Eye carries a story on Russian officials being offered British citizenships to pass on secrets for MI6. The Express looks at Dame Esther Rantzen's campaign to force a vote on assisted dying with what she describes as a positive step forward. Plot to target Parliament headlines on the front of the Times as pro-Palestinian activists tried to force the House of Commons into lockdown. The Sun has an exclusive with Spice Girl Mel B on how she had to budget shop to survive. King and the Tonic headlines. King and Tonic, actually. That's the Daily Mirror, as the King reads well-wishing cards from all across the world. Vile cat killer who went on to murder is on the front of the Daily Mail. The Financial Times leads with the stocks on a group of European businesses dubbed the granolas. Spag bol and not Sunday roast. The Daily Star leads on the country's favourite meals. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Guardian columnist Zoe Williams and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Wallis Simons. Welcome again to you both. Let's start with the Telegraph. Have a look at the front page there, and coming up to the second anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. We're reading that Britain's to spend 250 million on artillery shells for Ukraine. We know that they are lacking, woefully lacking in our artillery. They have the will and the people to fight, but the ammunition not apparent at the moment. Zoe?
It's very interesting, this, because there's been a sense for almost the entire 2 years that the Ukrainians were doing surprisingly well against the Russians, but over time, their advantage, their size advantage, their money advantage, the development of their military advantage would begin to tell. And yet the international community still seems really surprised that it's begun to tell. I mean, you know, the Ukrainians have effectively run out of weapons and Russia has not run out of weapons. And it's only now that they're having serious conversations in kind of semi-public domains about what the ramifications would be if Ukraine is completely vanquished and what that would mean for the rest of Europe and for NATO. You know, this is... Putting the shell factories on a war footing is less seismic, to my mind, than 2 weeks ago when the kind of armchair generals were talking about national service for Britain's young men. That was much more chilling. But it does seem that every country is going to be expected to do its part, certainly on the weapons front.
Well, I mean, I think that the reason that Ukraine hasn't done better in the war, why it's reached this impasse, is because the Western countries didn't supply it with enough weaponry to win, just to hold the Russians off and reach this status quo. And if we'd gone a bit further, they would have had the opportunity to do that. At the moment, according to the Telegraph, Russian forces are firing 5 times more shells than Ukraine per day. There was a story in the Telegraph just the other day about this big gun that this Ukrainian soldier had, really rocket launcher, and no rockets to launch with it. And I think it's very wise for Britain to begin to rearm. We're rearming, really, not just Ukraine, but ourselves. Our own armed forces are so depleted that we offer very little deterrent to Putin or anybody else. The armed forces are the smallest since the Napoleonic Wars. Grant Shapps last week was in a submarine that misfired a missile that plopped into the sea off the coast of America. And if we don't do that, then we are risking war. You know, as the ancient saying goes, in order to prepare for war, prevent war, you have to prepare for it.
Do you think there was a miscalculation at the start? Because at the beginning of the war, the narrative was very much that it will be over in a few days. And as Jake was saying, that perhaps they weren't armed enough at the start to actually win.
It didn't feel... To me, I think the reason people thought it was going to be over in a few days when it first started was because they didn't think the Ukrainians would put a fight up. So I think that's the surprise, really. There was a kind of Yeah, I think you're right. Probably a slightly defeatist, pre-defeatist attitude when Russia first invaded. Everybody was very appalled, but nobody was really expecting Ukraine to hold out. And nobody really had a plan for how to support and defend Ukraine, because obviously that's quite a big decision. That involves going to war with Russia at some point.
I mean, nobody believed that Russia was going to invade. Do you remember when the forces were building up, people were saying, no, 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 then it's just sabre rattling. And when it happened, there was an extraordinary moment where Zelensky did that video saying, I don't want to ride out of the country, I want weapons, I want arms, I'm staying here. And from that moment, we did pull behind Ukraine. The Ukraine flags appeared all over Britain and other countries as well. But the appetite's been lost a little bit. And my worry is that if Trump comes back into the White House at the end of this year, he might pull support from Ukraine to a drastic degree, which would really sink them and us, essentially.
Let's turn to the Mirror and this first-hand account of the people living in Ukraine and just really saying that they still have belief in their allies to help them. But Zoe, as Jake's pointed out, potentially, you know, America could withdraw support. We've got the problem at the moment with Congress not releasing the billions in aid, and their support and appetite for supporting Ukraine seems to be waning.
It's really tragic, because I think exactly as, you know, we've established, there was the realities of a land war really weren't considered at all before Russia invaded, and they weren't really considered that much in the first 6 months of the invasion. You know, because it's such an unfamiliar site, the tactics are so unfamiliar. There was a lot of almost the coverage seemed quite light-hearted. Everybody was laughing about Russian tanks getting stuck in the mud because they hadn't been used for so long, and, you know, all their rubber was degraded. Actually, what we're getting this weekend, because of the 2-year anniversary, is a lot of first-hand accounts of what it's like to live in a war zone, and it's really devastating. And I would be surprised if there isn't some concerted European response, although I would also be surprised, of course, if we were part of it. But yeah, I mean, the main worry is Trump getting in. But there's a lot of dove talk in Europe as well, because they're major players in the EU who do not want to be involved in a war.
It's important also to recognise that Ukraine hasn't just given up and isn't doing badly. I mean, even though there's been quite a lot of coverage about Russia retaking the city called Avdiivka, spelt with 2 I's weirdly in the middle, and that cost 17,000 Russian lives to take it. It's a very small place, but it's symbolically and strategically important. Ukraine has withdrawn from that, but at a very high cost to the Russians. Ukraine has destroyed about 1/5 of the Russian fleet off Mariupol. And the grain is starting to flow again. So there's been lots of reasonable gains for Ukraine. You just feel that if there was a bit more determination from the West to give them the backing they need, then they'd be able to see off Putin, and that would establish a precedent that would mean that Putin wouldn't be emboldened to then push the envelope further with NATO countries, which is the real fear.
And that's why Lord Cameron's saying this evening that the support mustn't falter.
Exactly.
It must continue. Let's have a look at this story in the Mirror. This is the former Post Office chief, Paula Venables, who's been officially stripped of her CBE by the King.
Well, of course, she handed it back a month ago, and she may have hoped that would, kind of, you know, forestall this rather humiliating headline, that she would be stripped of it, and B, would maybe take the heat off her for a little bit in the kind of post-mortem. Actually, that hasn't happened at all. There are stories breaking every day about what she knew and what she didn't know, and what emails she got in 2014 but then denied having had in 2015. So I think she's in for a long kind of sustained public jobbing, really. I can't see anybody giving over, partly because until the sub-postmasters are kind of justice has been served and they've got compensation, everybody's still really seethingly angry, and there aren't many kind of recognisable figures to be angry with but her.
That's really the point. I mean, she was stripped of this CBE after a petition of 1.2 million signatures called for it. But I think that, as the Mirror points out very aptly in its leader, it won't get sub-postmasters and mistresses their deserved compensation. And it's important that she's seen to be brought to justice, but at the same time, the compensation is really important as well. It mustn't be a distraction from that, because justice does need to be done across the board.
Yeah, it's way more,
Let's, before the break, let's have a look at the Daily Telegraph. And the Health Secretary apparently has indicated that she'll back the decriminalisation of abortion, Zoe?
A lot of MPs even are quite confused about abortion because you've been able to have an abortion in this country, whatever your circumstances, on demand since 1967. And so they kind of assume that means it's already decriminalised, but it's actually still part of the criminal statute, and it's a kind of medical loophole that allows you to have one where the doctor gives you two separate doctors have to testify that there's a risk to your life or health as the mother in order to get one, which is it's an anomaly and everybody just lives with it, but it does have consequences, such as there have been 80 prosecutions or investigations since 2016 into women who've lost late pregnancies, into whether or not they were trying to procure their abortion. And if they've been successfully prosecuted, which none but 4 were, they would have faced life in prison. So it's majorly consequential, whether it's in the criminal statutes or not. And Victoria Atkins is clearly very keen to take it out. But, of course, it's a free vote on abortion, so it doesn't matter really what the Health Secretary says.
And Jake, just very quickly, just to clarify, this is to decriminalise abortion after 24 weeks.
No, it's completely to decriminalise it, but at the moment it's...
That's one of the amendments, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's one to bring it down to 22 weeks as well, but I don't think that's going to...
Yes, limit from 24 weeks to 22 weeks. We have run out of time on this section, so we're going to take a break. Coming up, find out what the Get Well cards have been lifting, how the Get Well cards have been lifting the King's spirits. Stay with us. Welcome back. Here watching the press preview. Still with me, the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Wallis Simons, and Guardian columnist Zoe Williams. Let's have a look at the front of the Mirror. Their headline, King and Tonic. We sort of see what they've done with that. Basically, the King's reading all the cards that he's received, wishing him well following his cancer diagnosis. Zoe.
I mean, he obviously touched a nerve, didn't he? Because 7,000 cards is a non-trivial. I know.
He touched a nerve. People love him.
I know, people do love him, and and they genuinely wish him well. It's a non-trivial number of well wishes. That 7,000, and he should be pleased with it.
Especially as nobody sends cards anymore. Everyone sends emails.
Well, maybe the
can't really
royalists.
Email the King, can you?
You can't email the King. That's true.
Do you think he has an email address?
He probably does. That goes to a press secretary. But also, what's probably different is that you could never imagine the Queen, his late mother, in this situation because you never really knew very much about her health. So I suppose that's the big difference.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
I mean, she could have had she could have had multiple life-threatening diseases over her 96 years. You absolutely wouldn't have a clue. So yeah, no. I mean, he certainly kind of heralds a new openness, and I think people have experienced it as a sort of caring custodian motivation, because his kind of message has been always check your prostate.
Apparently he's been moved to tears by the cards as well. So it's not just a one-way street. And you've thought that, having been in that position for such long, obviously for his entire life, but you'd have kind of got used to receiving lots and lots of mail. But it seems like he really was moved by it. So if any viewers here sent one in, know that it was well received by him.
Yes. And as you say, Zoe, it has encouraged a lot of people to actually be tested, and it's brought, the cancer sufferers to the fore, and made people more aware.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's quite a thing for the King to be so open about such a private matter.
Yes.
So, I mean, it would be surprising to me if the impact hadn't been significant.
Finally, to the Star. Is this our national dish now? Apparently, the roast is out.
Story of the day.
And the spag bowl is in.
I mean, I don't want to offend any Italians, obviously. But this is, well, it's not, I mean, obviously I'll eat anything, but I'm just saying this is a much more simple dish than this.
Well, I've got to say,
what's more simple?
Spaghetti bolognese. So, like, if my son brought a girlfriend home and she could make spaghetti bolognese, but she couldn't make Yorkshire puddings, I'd be like, meh. Maybe the next one.
I feel very torn about it because I feel very sad that the roast is apparently, according to the start, on the way out. But at the same time, I myself would rather go for a spaghetti bolognese over a roast. So
Well, if you were in a pub on a Sunday afternoon, you would say, "I'll have the spaghetti bolognese."
In certain circumstances, I'm not anti-roast. I don't want to become a hate figure. But I find it a bit much sometimes, a bit overwhelming. It's huge and it's sort of a bit intimidating.
Yeah, it requires more skill, though, doesn't it, roast? Zoe and Jake, for the moment, thank you very much. We'll see you in the 11 o'clock hour. Let's take a look at the weather for you now.